A week before my son's wedding, my sister warned me about my husband's family's evil plot. Good dear, my dears. Welcome to the very first video of Voice of Mama Zee. Come sit close while I tell you a story that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. This happened just 2 months ago, and it nearly destroyed the most important day of my son's life. You see, a week before my boy Joe's wedding to his sweet Favor, I was in my kitchen making wedding favors when my blood sister Margaret came rushing through my back door, white as a ghost and shaking like a leaf. What she told me that afternoon changed everything and showed me just how wicked some people can be, even family. My name is Mama Zee, and I'm 63 years old. I've been married to my husband Frank for 45 years, and we have one of our precious sons, Joe, who was about to marry the love of his life. But Frank's family, oh, my dears, they are a different breed entirely. His mother Dolores, his sister Rita, and his brother Carl have always thought they were better than everyone else, especially me. For 45 years, they've made snide comments about my cooking, my housekeeping, and how I raised Joe. They never thought I was good enough for their Frank. Now, you need to understand that Joe's wedding was going to be the social event of our small town. Favor comes from a lovely, well-respected family, and her father owns the biggest furniture store in 3 counties. The wedding was planned for 200 guests at the grand ballroom of our finest hotel, with dinner, dancing, and all the trimmings. Joe and Favor had saved for 2 years to give their friends and family the most beautiful celebration. But Frank's family, well, they saw this wedding as their chance to finally put me in my place and show everyone that they were the real power in our family. What I didn't know was that they had been secretly planning something so cruel and vindictive that it could have ruined Joe and Favor's marriage before it even began. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Margaret came bursting through my door. My sister and I have been close our whole lives, we're only 13 months apart, and people used to mistake us for twins when we were young. Margaret lives just 3 blocks away, and we talk every single day. She knows Frank's family almost as well as I do, and she's never trusted them, not for 45 years. Mama Zee, Margaret gasped, clutching her chest and trying to catch her breath, you need to sit down. I have something terrible to tell you about Frank's family. I could see the fear in her sister's eyes, and my heart started pounding. What is it, Margaret? What's happened? Margaret sat down at my kitchen table and took my hands in hers. I was at the beauty shop this morning, you know, getting my hair done for the wedding. Well, I was under the dryer in the back corner where no one could see me, when Dolores, Rita, and Carl came in. They didn't know I was there, and they started talking about their plans for Joe's wedding. My blood ran cold. Frank's family making secret plans was never a good thing. What kind of plans? Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper, even though we were alone in my house. Mama Zee, they're planning to humiliate you and Joe at the wedding. They want to embarrass your family so badly that Favor's family will think twice about the marriage. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. What do you mean? What are they planning to do? Margaret pulled a small notebook from her purse. I wrote down everything I heard because I knew you wouldn't believe how awful it was. They have 3 different schemes planned for the wedding day. She opened her notebook and began reading. First, Dolores is planning to wear a white dress to the wedding. Not cream, not ivory, pure white, like she's competing with the bride. She wants everyone to think she's the most important woman there. I gasped. Everyone knows you never wear white to someone else's wedding, it's the most disrespectful thing you can do to a bride. But that's not the worst part, Margaret continued. Rita is planning to stand up during the ceremony and object to the marriage. She's going to claim that Joe is too young to make such a serious decision and that Favor is only marrying him for his money. My heart was racing now. An objection during the ceremony would be humiliating for everyone involved and could traumatize Joe and Favor on what should be the happiest day of their lives. And Carl, Margaret said, her voice getting even more serious, Carl is planning to give a speech during the reception where he'll tell embarrassing stories about Joe from when he was a child. He's going to make Joe sound irresponsible and immature in front of all of Favor's family and friends. I sat there in shock, trying to process what my sister was telling me. Frank's family wasn't just planning to be rude or difficult, they were actively scheming to destroy my son's wedding day and possibly his marriage. There's more, Margaret said quietly. They're also planning to leave right after dinner, before the dancing starts, to make it look like they don't approve of the marriage. They want Favor's family to think that even Joe's own relatives don't support the union. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. After 45 years of dealing with Frank's family's cruelty, I thought I had seen the worst of them. But this was beyond anything they had ever done before. They were willing to destroy their own nephew's happiness just to hurt me. Margaret, what am I going to do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed and helpless. If I tell Joe what they're planning, it will break his heart and cause a huge family fight right before his wedding. But if I don't do anything, they're going to ruin the most important day of his life. Margaret squeezed my hands tighter. Mama Zee, we're going to stop them. But we have to be smart about it. If we confront them directly, they'll just deny everything and maybe come up with something even worse. We need to outsmart them. My sister and I spent the rest of that afternoon planning our own strategy to protect Joe's wedding. Margaret had always been the clever one, and she came up with ideas that I never would have thought of on my own. Here's what we're going to do, Margaret said, pulling out a fresh page in her notebook. We're going to contact the wedding coordinator, the photographer, and even the minister to prepare them for what might happen. And we're going to have backup plans for every single one of their schemes. Over the next 3 days, Margaret and I worked like secret agents preparing for the wedding. We met with Mrs. Patterson, the wedding coordinator at the hotel, and explained the situation without going into too much family drama. Mrs. Patterson, we have reason to believe that some guests might try to disrupt the ceremony or reception, I told her. Can you help us make sure everything goes smoothly? Mrs. Patterson had been coordinating weddings for 20 years, and she immediately understood what we were dealing with. Oh honey, I've seen this before. Don't worry, we'll make sure your son's day is perfect. Margaret and I also spoke with Reverend Thompson, who would be performing the ceremony. We explained that someone might try to object to the marriage for personal reasons rather than legal ones. Reverend, if someone objects during the ceremony, is there a way to handle it quickly without ruining the whole service? Margaret asked. Reverend Thompson smiled kindly. My dear ladies, in 40 years of performing weddings, I've learned how to handle all sorts of disruptions. If anyone tries to interrupt Joe and Favor's vows for frivolous reasons, I'll address it firmly and continue with the ceremony. We even spoke with the photographer and asked him to be prepared to capture any dramatic moments that might occur, just in case we needed evidence of what Frank's family had tried to do. But our most important preparation was creating backup plans for each of their schemes. For Dolores's white dress, we arranged for Margaret to have a glass of red wine accidentally ready to spill if necessary. For Rita's planned objection, we asked 3 of Joe's closest friends to be prepared to escort her out if she caused a disruption. And for Carl's embarrassing speech, we made sure the DJ knew to cut off the microphone if anyone went off script during the reception. The night before the wedding, I could barely sleep. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong and wondering if Frank's family would actually go through with their cruel plans. Part of me hoped that Margaret had misunderstood what she heard at the beauty shop, but I knew in my heart that Dolores, Rita, and Carl were capable of exactly the kind of vindictive behavior my sister had described. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and beautiful. Joe was glowing with happiness as he got ready, completely unaware of the drama that his father's family was planning. Favor looked absolutely radiant in her wedding dress, and her parents were beaming with pride and joy. Mom, I can't believe this day is finally here, Joe said as I helped him with his tie. Thank you for everything you've done to make this wedding perfect. Favor and I are so grateful for all your hard work. Looking at my son's happy face, I felt more determined than ever to protect his special day from his father's family's cruelty. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, and by 3:30, most of the guests had arrived and were seated in the beautiful ballroom. I was greeting people and making sure everything was running smoothly when I saw Dolores walk in wearing exactly what Margaret had warned me about, a pure white dress that was clearly designed to upstage the bride. Several guests gasped when they saw Dolores, and I could hear whispered comments about how inappropriate her outfit was. But I was ready for this. Margaret was stationed near the entrance with her glass of red wine, and we made eye contact across the room. Just as Dolores was making her way to her seat in the front row, Margaret accidentally bumped into her while trying to find her own seat. The red wine splashed across the front of Dolores's white dress, leaving a large, unmistakable stain right across the bodice. Oh my goodness, I'm so clumsy. Margaret exclaimed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Dolores, I'm so sorry. Here, let me help you clean that up. Dolores was furious, but she couldn't make a scene without looking even more foolish. She had to spend the next 15 minutes in the ladies' room trying to clean wine out of her dress, and when she returned, the white fabric was stained pink and she looked thoroughly defeated. The ceremony began beautifully, with Joe and Favor exchanging vows that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Reverend Thompson was conducting the service with perfect dignity when we reached the part where he asked if anyone objected to the union. Right on schedule, Rita started to stand up with her mouth open to speak. But before she could say a word, Reverend Thompson looked directly at her with a stern expression and said firmly, "I should clarify that this question refers only to legal impediments to this marriage, such as existing marriages or close family relations. Personal opinions or family disagreements are not grounds for objection and will not be recognized." Rita looked shocked and confused, clearly not expecting the minister to shut down her planned disruption before she could even begin. She sat back down with her mouth still hanging open, looking foolish and embarrassed. The ceremony continued beautifully, and Joe and Favor were pronounced husband and wife to thunderous applause. As they kissed and walked back down the aisle, I felt a surge of relief and pride. We had successfully protected the most important part of their day. But I knew the real test would come during the reception, when Carl was planning to give his embarrassing speech about Joe. Margaret and I positioned ourselves near the DJ booth and waited. During the dinner service, everything went perfectly. The food was delicious, the music was lovely, and Joe and Favor looked radiantly happy as they greeted their guests and accepted congratulations on their marriage. When it came time for the toasts, Joe's best man gave a wonderful speech about their friendship, and Favor's father spoke beautifully about welcoming Joe into their family. Then Carl stood up and asked for the microphone. "I'd like to say a few words about my nephew Joe," Carl announced with a smirk that told me he was about to begin his planned humiliation. But Mrs. Patterson, the wedding coordinator, was ready for him. She had positioned herself near the DJ booth with a direct line of communication to the sound technician. Carl began his speech by talking about Joe as a child, and at first, his comments seemed harmless and even sweet. But then he started getting into more embarrassing territory, talking about times when Joe had been in trouble or made mistakes. "I remember when Joe was 12 and he tried to impress a girl by..." Carl continued, clearly building up to something mortifying. That's when Mrs. Patterson signaled the DJ, who smoothly interrupted Carl by announcing, "Thank you so much for those lovely words. Now let's invite the bride and groom to the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife." The music started immediately, and all attention turned to Joe and Favor as they began their beautiful first dance. Carl was left standing with the microphone, looking frustrated that his speech had been cut short just when he was getting to the embarrassing parts. But the best moment came later in the evening when Dolores, Rita, and Carl gathered near the exit, clearly preparing to leave early as they had planned. Margaret and I were watching from across the room when Favor's father approached them with a concerned expression. "Are you folks leaving already?" Favor's father asked in his loud, friendly voice that carried across the room. "The evening is just getting started. We were hoping you'd stay for the cake cutting and more dancing." Several other guests turned to look when they heard Favor's father's comment, and suddenly Dolores, Rita, and Carl found themselves in the spotlight they hadn't wanted. They couldn't leave without looking rude and unsupportive, so they were forced to stay for the rest of the reception, smiling uncomfortably as Joe and Favor celebrated with their friends and family. The evening ended perfectly, with Joe and Favor dancing surrounded by all their loved ones. As the newlyweds were leaving for their honeymoon, Joe pulled me aside for a private moment. "Mom, I don't know what you did, but I know you did something," Joe said with a knowing smile. I could tell that Dad's family was planning to cause trouble, but somehow everything went perfectly. "Thank you for protecting our day." I hugged my son tightly, feeling grateful that Margaret and I had been able to give him and Favor the beautiful wedding they deserved. "That's what mothers are for, sweetheart. I would do anything to protect your happiness." 2 weeks later, Margaret and I were having coffee in my kitchen when Frank came home looking sheepish and embarrassed. "Mama Zee, I need to apologize," Frank said, sitting down heavily at the kitchen table. "My mother and my siblings told me what they were planning to do at Joe's wedding. I had no idea they were scheming to embarrass you and Joe." I looked at my husband with a mixture of disappointment and pity. After 45 years of marriage, he was finally seeing his family's cruelty clearly. "Frank, this isn't the first time your family has tried to hurt me," I said quietly. "But this time, they were willing to destroy our son's happiness just to get back at me. That's something I can never forgive." Frank nodded sadly. "I know. I told them that their behavior was unacceptable and that they owe you and Joe an apology." But more importantly, I told them that if they ever try to hurt our family again, they won't be welcome in our home. It took Frank 45 years, but he finally stood up to his family and chose his wife and son over the people who had been poisoning our lives with their jealousy and cruelty. Margaret squeezed my hand across the table. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show people who they really are and what really matters, she said wisely. Joe and Favor returned from their honeymoon glowing with happiness and full of gratitude for the perfect wedding we had given them. They still don't know all the details of what Frank's family had planned, and they don't need to. What matters is that their special day was everything they dreamed it would be. My dears, the lesson of this story is that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes your real family is the people who stand by you when others try to tear you down. Margaret proved once again that she's not just my sister, but my truest friend and ally. And sometimes, when you're faced with people who want to destroy something beautiful out of spite and jealousy, the best response isn't to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the best response is to quietly, cleverly, and thoroughly outmaneuver them while protecting the people you love. Dolores, Rita, and Carl learned that their schemes and cruelty were no match for two sisters who were determined to protect a young couple's happiness. And Frank learned that after 45 years, it was time to choose between his wife and his toxic family. Joe and Favor's marriage is thriving, and they're expecting their first baby this spring. Frank's family has been much more respectful since the wedding, and Frank has made it clear that any future attempts to hurt our family will result in permanent estrangement. Sometimes the best revenge is simply making sure that good people get to be happy despite the efforts of those who wish them harm. And sometimes all it takes is one sister who loves you enough to sit under a hairdryer and eavesdrop on the people who want to hurt you. Now, my dears, remember this story when you're faced with people who try to spoil beautiful moments out of jealousy or spite. Surround yourself with people who will protect your joy, and never be afraid to stand up for the people you love, even if it means going to war with your own family. Thank you for listening, my dears. This is Mama Zee. Hold your joy close, protect your peace, and let love lead. Until next time.